In the last video in this series, you got to see this engine start and run. It's not running perfectly, but it's running pretty well for an old diesel that sat for a while. And you got to see how I determined which one of the cylinders is misfiring. We focused right here on number 2 in review. You know, the injector is leaking pretty badly at the halves. And when I would loosen the nut, the performance would actually increase. Also, by shooting a little WD-40 into the intake, the engine would smooth out. So we still have a fuel delivery problem, and I think it's down to 1 or 2 of these fuel injectors. And also in the last video, you got to see us do a quick test on these injectors. They're all set at non-turbo pressure release, but that's not a big deal in terms of running. We may have to rebuild the injectors, but right now, in this video, I want to determine whether the engines were saving. Sure, it runs, but to determine whether it's worth saving, we have to determine how strong it is, how healthy it is, what's the oil pressure, and so on. And I'm going to start right now, and we're going to change this number 2 fuel injector. This is a rebuilt fuel injector with one of our new nozzles. But what we're looking for is, can we get this engine to run relatively smoothly on 5 cylinders? And if we can, we'll go from there. So we're going to go off camera now. You've seen me change injectors before. We'll get this new injector in, and we'll come back and fire this thing up. We've got the rebuilt injector installed and torqued down to 75 foot-pounds. Make sure you don't over-torque these. You will damage and actually can bind up the nozzles if you tighten this too tight. And then I want to share with you a tip about installing this braided injector return hose. You almost have to replace this every time you remove or replace a fuel injector. Some people complain it doesn't last very long. I believe it's because it's mishandled when it's installed. This is a braid over rubber, and if you damage the braid, it's going to loosen this tip up and you'll eventually have leaks. First thing is, when you cut this with a razor over wood and make a real clean cut. Notice I didn't use some dull scissors when I cut that, and see this fraying up. And then, to further protect the braid, use a little bit of engine oil in the tip, right there like that. And then the best thing, of course, is our special tool for installing these. If you try to take a pair of pliers and squeeze these and try to force them on, you can damage the rubber up, you know, an inch above where it attaches to the nipple. So I'm going to put that right on the tool and reach down in here like this, and you'll notice how easy it's going to slip on with that oil right down to the bottom. You can see no fraying on the tip and no over squeezing the rubber inside this hose. You want to know something? I'm convinced this thing's going to run on all 5 cylinders. Let's see if I'm right. Wow, come on in. Come on in, we'll show them how well this thing's running. Okay, right now it's running on all 5 cylinders. And if you recall, we were having that problem with number 2. Let me do a quick test now and see if that one is firing properly. It's going to loosen up the injector nut. Yep, see that? Firing well on number 2. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, Ken, it's idling high and it looks like it's vibrating. Some of you can probably guess why it's vibrating so much, and it's not the engine, it's something else. So I'm going to shut it down. There's a couple more things we want to do. Remember, I didn't change the fuel filters at all. I didn't even change the fuel, which kind of smells old. And I wanted to do that to prove a point. A lot of people think, hey, it's got to be filters. Not necessarily. And now I do want to change the filters, and we're going to run a diesel purge through the fuel injection system. And let's see how that improves the engine. I've done 2 things, and I'm going to explain what they are, then we're going to start the engine up again. Here I've installed what I call my diesel emergency fuel tank. It also can double as a purge tank. The reason I call it an emergency tank is you can put this with fuel in your trunk when you're on a trip. If you have a couple screwdrivers with you and you run out of fuel, or if your filters get plugged, you can hook it up to the system and run your engine right off this tank. And that's what I've done here is I've put some diesel purge in here, and we've run it for about a can. We got just a little bit left, and I'm going to go ahead and start it. I've also changed the fuel filter. When I do troubleshooting like this, I usually do one or two things at a time and then retest the engine. If you do a whole bunch of stuff and suddenly the engine runs real well, you're really not going to know what it was that fixed the problem. Now, you know, earlier I told you that the fuel in the fuel tank smell suspect. It even smells like it might have a little bit of gas, definitely very stale. So I'm not going to run it on the main tank anymore until I get it drained and get new fuel. But as soon as the diesel purge is done here, I'm going to put about a quart of just regular diesel fuel. So when I'm driving the car around and testing other things, I'll be running it off this extra fuel tank right here. What I think I'll do here is I'm just going to stand outside the car. I'm not even going to glow it. I'm just going to reach in and start cranking. Let's see if it'll start. If you have really high compression and it is not cold outside, it's about, 65 degrees out right now. Obviously the engine is glowing while you're cranking, but starting a diesel engine without using any pre-glow is a really good indicator of health. Also, the way it shuts down. So I'm going to show you how this engine shuts off, and then I'll explain. So I'm going to just open the door here, reach in, not even glow it. Okay. Look at that. Now, disregard this. I haven't taken the time to replace those rubber shock mounts on the air filter housing. I just wanted to put the air filter back on while I'm doing this running. You notice it's still idling high. That's because it shakes quite a bit when I idle it down due to another problem. But look at how this runs. Isn't that something? I just love the way it runs on diesel purge. So now watch as I shut it off. Watch the engine. Watch how the engine reacts when it stops. Did you notice how abruptly it stopped? Once the vacuum shut off, pulled the fuel off, you notice it just went bang. It just stops. If you have a weak engine with weak compression, you're not going to get that sudden abrupt stop. It's going to maybe roll through half a revolution or something. If it's really bad, it'll sound like a gas engine when you turn it off. So all indicators now, to me, are that this engine is well worth saving. I'm not seeing any major oil leaks, not any major coolant leaks. Obviously, we have other issues to fix. So the question now is the car worth saving? And in the next video, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to come up with a list. I'm going to get my clipboard out. I'm going to write down everything that I think needs fixing and the priority with which it should be done. And we'll discuss this, and then we'll determine whether or not, hey, this car is worth fixing or not. And in closing here, I have a little quiz for you. This is going to be fun, especially for those of you who've been around diesels. Take a look. Some of you have probably already seen this. What is that for? That's the first question. And the second question is, why is it there? Just go ahead and leave your replies. We'll have a little fun with this little quiz right here. And I'll see you in the next episode.